Hello, and welcome to the Angus and Pete Show. Views and opinions are strictly those of the presenters and their guests and should not be taken as advice. Goodness knows, we're not qualified to advise you about anything. Side effects may include mild amusement and occasional enlightenment with feelings of embarrassment, apathy, disappointment, and pity.
Welcome to episode 4. I'm Angus Pacey.
And I'm Pete Brown, and we are the Angus and Pete Show.
This is the place where you can listen to two blokes chatting about that riveting world of customer engagement.
You know, customer engagement, otherwise known as call centre, contact centre, customer service, customer experience, CX, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah, and if you want to know more about us, check us out on LinkedIn. So, Pete, what is in our post bag?
We've got quite a bit in the post bag this week. We were messaged direct from Mrs. Nosy in Dubai, our first piece of input from the Middle East, who wants to know what has the feedback been on episodes 1, 2 and 3, which is a bit personal, and I'm not going to give out too much information, but what I can say is episode 1, A is for analysts, has been the most listened to episode so far.
Okay, that's interesting.
Episode 2, which was running a close second in terms of listeners, was by far the most liked. By far the most
Are you saying that
appreciated.
that's because it was a trip down your memory lane?
Yeah, that's probably it. So this was the episode around why we're here, the little bit of a history lesson. We assume everyone knows everything. Well, guess what? They don't. They don't know why we consider to be the basics in some cases. Third piece of information for Mrs. Nosy in Dubai is that episode 3 was the most rambling and disjointed so far. This was the episode about supply and buy chain.
That's the best representation of reality. That's brilliant.
Exactly. Two guys talking. Normally we are rambling and disjointed, so we're just bringing a little bit of authenticity to the whole thing as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, that's the one of the examples from the post bag. Haven't got time to go through everything because we actually got a lot of face-to-face feedback when we were at CC Expo, Angus, if you remember. I know it was only last week, but you've been doing a lot of travelling since then, and your memory's not as good as it used to be.
Thank you, Pete. Yeah, I think there was a lot of feedback. I mean, I never realized that so many people had actually twigged that we were doing the podcast. So I guess our marketing has actually worked a little bit.
It makes you wonder why they're not listening and liking.
People are lazy. All you lazy buggers out there listening to this, do us a favor and actually go and give us 5 stars instead of sitting on your thumbs.
Absolutely. Well said. Thank you very much. So do you remember Mr. Cynical from episode 1? Mr. Cynical from Manchester.
Everybody thinks he was a fictitious individual. However,
we actually met him, didn't we? We met him at CC Expo. And whilst he's got a lot to say for himself when he's sitting behind his keyboard, he was actually quite pleasant, complimentary, and pleasure to engage with.
He's a colleague from way back who was my nemesis in many meetings, and I know that you crossed swords with him a couple of times as well. He's on the technical side. He's now sitting in a position where he kind of understands what it's like to be a product manager. And he gave us really good feedback.
He did. As one of the people who said they want to come on and join as guests because they want to have some input into this thing. So we'll get to that. But Mr. Cynical from Manchester, we will be back to you. And Angus, we'll see how cynical he is when he realises we're not going to pay him for his involvement. Finally, another bit of feedback. Several people have said we need to change the name of the show. We need to change it from the Angus and Pete Show to the Pete and Angus Show because it just scans and sounds better. I don't know what you think about that.
These are the people that are actually confused. And to be honest, I'm not going to take feedback from 1 or 2 individuals that are dictionary obsessed and your best mates. So you know what? Let's just stick with it. I'll tell you what, if our subscribers drop off a cliff for the next 6 episodes, then we'll entertain it. But you know what? Don't change what works.
Okay, we'll have that conversation when we have more evidence and proof points. So we've mentioned CC Expo a few times. Just for people that may not know what it is, we're talking about the Call and Contact Centre Expo, which took place in London last week. It's billed as the flagship event for customer engagement vendors and the industry. We said last week that we'd take a look at it. We both went, we both attended. It was great to catch up with friends and adversaries alike. Angus, what were your impressions and observations of CC Expo this year? You've been to a lot of them. You know the industry. You know a lot of people that were there. What did you think?
Putting aside the fact that the weather was really bad and the trains weren't working on day one, it was still pretty busy, but it was smaller. I think that's what slapped me in the face. It was smaller than it was the previous 2 years, and the structure of it changed.
Okay.
Now,
what do you mean by that?
so if you had a look at the stands, the big vendors dominated. And the other one, which was always my favorite quarter to go and walk through, and we did do that last year, there's always one quarter of the show which has got all those little pop-up stalls with small companies, innovative companies, showing off technology that, is startup type stuff. It's really good, really innovative. This year, it wasn't. That was really noticeable.
No, I noticed.
Startup Alley was gone.
I noticed that. Do you know how many exhibitors there were? I do, because I did my homework. Have you done your homework?
If I had to guess, 50.
Actually, there were 106 exhibitors. What was also interesting for me, that there were 116 speakers. There were a lot of presentations in the keynote area and the theatres that were dotted around the venue. I listened to a lot of those speakers, and most of them are really good. Most of them are quality presenters. Some of the material, some of the content was a little bit questionable, and I don't mean that as a reflection of the people that were presenting. Certainly the vendor stuff was a little bit questionable, and we're going to come on to why that is in a minute. Of the speakers, 20% of them were buyers. So 20% of them were from the user organisations of customer engagement technology. So retailers, utilities, people that use this stuff. 70% of the speakers were from vendor and seller organisations. There's another 10% to go. That 10% was really about influencers and non-vendor, non-customer organisations that are associated with the customer engagement industry.
So is that 10% the randoms and the consultants and the analysts?
Yeah, the consultants, the analysts, and those influencers who don't have any skin in the game but have got lots to say about it. So you say that there was a significantly smaller footprint. It felt smaller. You said that it was dominated by the big guys.
Yeah.
What do you mean? What does that mean? And what's that telling us?
What was interesting is measuring how the vendor stands grew or shrunk versus the previous year. Some of them shrunk significantly. So if you think about 8x8 and Vonage, their presence kind of disappeared versus last year. They had quite a big presence last year, and this year it probably shrunk by 30%.
So 8x8 had an 8x8 stand last year, and they were what, 6x6 this year?
Yeah, I think it was more 4x4.
Oh, okay, interesting.
It wasn't big. Actually, if you walk past it, you'd miss it. They were very quiet as well. That was it. Last year they were much bigger. Overall, if you have a look at it, I think the bigger vendors clearly are dominating this, and the smaller ones are getting smaller. And is that a reflection of marketing budget? Is that a reflection of resources? Don't know. No.
I had a chat with a few of the vendors. Those stands, the bigger stands, they cost £100,000 or more just for that floor space. You've then got to build an exhibition stand on top of it. You've got to staff it. You've got to pay the exorbitant bar tabs and hotel expenses that come with sending your sales force and your pre-sales force to those events. It's not a cheap thing to do. What I also discovered when you talk to the vendors, the ones that were prepared to be honest and transparent, the actual number of what you could call quality leads, i.e. buyers, coming along with a project, with something that you could qualify as a reasonable opportunity, are actually quite small, and in some cases over those 2 days can be measured in single digits. Maybe those organisations are spending less because it just doesn't return.
Different shows have got different outcomes to them. If you take that show specifically, I think they're branding exercises. They are presence exercises, making yourself visible. If you were talking about the presentations around the edges that were going on at the same time, I actually think those are the valuable ones. I think the stands themselves are demo fests. They are there for the propeller heads to go and have a look at. And you are going to see demos to death. I think the conversations that happen in the corridors, those are the ones that are much more valuable. If you say I was talking to one of the guys off one of the other vendor stands that I know, and he said, this is a networking show. It's not anything beyond that. It's a networking show.
I guess if you're really looking to drive your exposure and your engagement with buyers through those presentations, then you really need to, as a speaker organisation, then you really need to have something interesting to say. So what do you think about the messaging? What do you think about who was saying what? Because I spoke to salespeople, marketing people, pre-sales people on a whole range of different vendors, sellers, stands. And you know what? They're all saying the same thing.
Yeah,
they're all saying the same thing.
I spoke to some of the guys on two of the big vendor stands, and it's a small industry. We all know each other, and we were standing in the corridor having a sort of comparison catch-up about, how's life? What have you been doing? How hungover are you from last night? And they came to the same conclusion that I came to, and we've been saying this for a long time about trade shows, though. If you tear the sticker off the stand, change the color, change the font, everybody's talking about AI in exactly the same way.
Right. So we agree then that whatever they were doing, whatever they were selling, wherever they came from, every single major vendor and most of the others, 90% of those exhibitionists, we shall call them, had AI on their stand. Do you know what, Angus? What I noticed was that the whole pitch, the whole story, once you actually started speaking to people, was very much about the how to do it rather than the why to do it. So the how of the technology rather than the why of the business case. And I don't know whether that was down to sales people's knowledge, awareness, because AI is quite new, right? AI is quite a new thing. And it's only a couple of years old in terms of the way that it's really hit the customer engagement industry. But it just felt to me like I was talking to people that had lots of theory to talk about, lots of stuff to say about large language models and all these different things that it could potentially do, with very little information or proof about why you should actually do it. What's the compelling reason to do this? And it felt a little bit to me, you know how old I am, like being right at the beginning of the whole customer engagement contact center piece, where telecom salespeople suddenly were hit with this, oh my God, what the bloody hell is this? Well, it's a call center. It's completely different to anything you know, but you need to learn how to sell it because it's interlinked with what you're selling right now. There's a good value add sale here. It feels like the same thing. I wonder whether salespeople, pre-salespeople are up to having that meaningful conversation with businesses about AI. I didn't get the impression that they were.
So, while you were flapping your gums to your mates, I actually went and sat in some presentations. I snuck in.
Oh, did you?
Two things kind of hit me. One of the big names in the UK industry, Content Guru, they were talking about AI. They were talking AI, but talking about exactly the same stuff that they were talking about last year. So there was a lot of reskinning going on of old stuff, but there's very little depth to it. The second thing that when you listen to the salespeople and you go on 4 or 5 vendor stands and you listen to their pitches, it reminds me of voice over IP in the 90s. We were all talking about new technology, voice over IP. We're going to throw away your PBX in the office and it'll disappear into the cloud. And it took about 15 years before that actually happened.
Right. Okay.
I wonder whether we're in the same case. And I think the sales guys that are struggling because it is so early on, practical experience is not there. It's all theory still. It's all hypothesis and very little reality. Everybody's talking the same game, and we still have got to see where this sticks. So focusing on features because that's what they can hang on to. They can't really give you very many, if any, practical examples of where they've got it working.
Right. So there are lots of quite interesting applications in the customer engagement space, and they seem to be focused on one, front end automation, so making what was automated a self-learning AI powered environment for customers. And the other side of it seems to be internally focused, which is all about making our friend, the call center agent, contact center agent, more efficient, more effective, more engaging when they're handling that live contact. There are a couple of things, though, that people really weren't talking about. And the first one is security, privacy. I didn't hear the term GDPR once. Rewind 2, 3, 4 years ago when the cloud was becoming a thing, pre-pandemic, everyone was talking about GDPR and data security and data sovereignty. It's something we need to have a conversation about, because when you speak to the likes of Microsoft and AWS with their elastic resource environments and servers everywhere, where is this stuff? Where is the data? Where is the reference material? Where does it reside? How safe is it? How accurate is it? And what guarantees do we get if it's not?
But you're challenging the vendor view of it. Turn that on its side a little bit. If you talk to customers, there are two things that they're talking about. Security, all over the place. They are petrified their customer data is going to go off into some vendor's pocket to be used as training data. Confidential customer data. The other thing that they're talking about is job security, and they get mixed up. I'm in Egypt at the moment, and that is one of the topics that came top of pile. Never mind all the theory of this. What's the impact on jobs? What's the real business case for me to potentially disrupt my workforce and impact my economy? The customers are absolutely talking about it, and the vendors are not thinking about that at all. So I think that's something we need to unpack a little bit more. I think on the show, if you asked the question, some of the vendors had really good stories and they could articulate that in great detail. You go on to some of the other vendor stands, they just kind of ran for the hills at that point in time going, I'm out.
So, okay, we're in the early stages of a new technology in an established market, which is always an interesting dynamic. What about cost? When I asked around, how much does this stuff cost? How do you bill for it? What is the charging model? There wasn't much detail, information about that either. Did you get that feeling too?
Yeah, no, people are not talking about it. I think this is the elephant in the room, the rhino in the closet. It's a scary topic for a number of reasons.
The rhino in the closet?
Yeah, the pink one. It gets worse. Just wait until I've got another glass of wine in me. I'll be fine. But if you have a look at it, and this came up this week actually, look at the billions that are being spent at the root of AI by the big guns, the Amazons, the Googles, the Microsofts. They are spending billions. Now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that at some point in time, those companies have got to return value to their shareholders, and they've got to monetize this.
Right.
Somebody is going to have to pay for that. Now, given that most of the stuff is all coming out of the US, my bet is that the product managers and the business people that are looking at these business cases are all using US metrics and US data to do that.
Right.
Because that's their comfort zone. If you had to ask any product manager in a vendor in the US how many contact center agents there are in Cairo, they'd have a hard time pointing out Cairo on a map, let alone being able to answer that question. But it's important because the cost of an agent in a BPO, in an outsourcer in Egypt, is very different to the cost of an agent in an outsourcer in India, is very different to the cost of an agent in the US, in Denver,
So,
versus somebody in Manchester.
When I was talking to the sales organizations and some of the product managers at the CC Expo, and, in other places, in other times over the last 6 months or so, it feels to me like that whole thing around monetization profitable monetization, because remember, these are established businesses now. As you said earlier on, this is horribly expensive stuff to do and to develop. There will be startups, but they'll be snapped up very quickly. So the actual deliverers of this, profitable deliverers of this, will be the big boys, will be the established vendors in either customer engagement, the hyperscalers, whatever they are. And I just wonder, in our industry, I had this horrible thought actually, what if, because of the cost dynamics of human beings on the one hand versus AI-powered technology on the other, what if AI does actually replace agents in the call center, but it actually replaces agents in the call center as the most expensive thing in the call center? We've all known for years that human beings are the most expensive thing. AI seems to be a potential candidate for replacing one expensive resource with another one. What do you think about that?
I think I've got a new metric that we need to measure.
Go on.
Cost of agent per minute.
Right. Because that's how we're going to be measuring AI, right? It looks like it's going to be a consumption model.
It's going to go down that route, and I think that's something to look at. What is the cost per agent per minute versus what you're trying to deploy? And I think the other thing is that if you look at deploying AI in your contact center, and I think everybody's going to try it. Everybody's going to try it because they want to work it out. I think anybody that tries to build a business case just on that single use case or couple of use cases is delusional.
Yep.
You've got to look at your entire customer journey and then look at your business case around that, because there are benefits to automation in the front end. If you look at getting somebody to interact with you in a digital channel and getting human interaction away from the contact center, you've got to look at that as an entire journey. If you look at a narrow use case for AI, I think it's going to fail because the cost is too high.
So you're talking about use cases in customer engagement. Actually, AI is not unique, but it's quite unusual insofar as it's applicable to the whole business, right? The accounts department, the logistics department, the non-customer facing departments can make as much use of it as the customer facing departments can. So I guess when you're buying this stuff, you want to be buying it at scale as well as using it at scale to get the economies of scale that go with it. This feels like we need to do a whole new episode on this, and we will. There's a lot to go into here. So we've spoken about the security piece. We've touched on that. We've spoken about the cost and financial metrics that may well go with this. There were two other things that were missing for me. One of them was the single platform story. Given what we've just been talking about, there are very few vendors out there that have got platforms that can look after back office, front office, security, reliability, and do it well in customer engagement, so offer a premium product in customer engagement, but also do the other bits and pieces that go around it. That's the first thing. Do you know the thing that was really, really obvious to me, and what the whole world's talking about at the moment? There was no mention by any vendors, big or small, about sustainability and the environment and the environmental impact of AI, potentially, given the energy that this thing requires to do the basics. I was reading something today which said it's 1 million times less efficient than a human brain in terms of energy consumption. So where does that leave us? Where's the sustainability stories? And when buyers are buying, they need to be thinking about that. Because what we might end up doing is replacing agents with something more expensive from a financial perspective and also more costly from a sustainability and environmental perspective, which is not really what we're trying to do here, is it?
It is a top of mind, top of discussion topic everywhere across EMEA. It's a major topic and comes up in two ways. One, how much power are we going to need to drive AI? And if you're in North Africa where water is at a premium, the question comes up, how are we going to cool these data centers to cool a data center plus AI, staggering amounts of clean water?
Do you know what, Angus? I heard a stat last week. For every 30 chat GPT inquiries or conversations you start, you use the equivalent of 1 cup of water. The other thing is, you're talking about power and energy. I also read, this is out there in the public domain, has been for some time, I was just a bit slow to pick up on it. Microsoft and AWS are going nuclear. Microsoft have signed a 20-year contract with the nuclear reactor at 3 Mile Island. Those of us of a certain age will remember 3 Mile Island.
They're looking to make another hole.
Yeah, exactly. It had a little bit of an issue back in the day. But the point is that this is where it's going. Now, actually, on the scheme of things, nuclear energy is clean. It's low, no emissions. It's clean from an environmental perspective. In the short to medium term, it's a pretty filthy thing in the longer term. But hey, this is where we are. So all of this stuff just needs to be spoken about. We don't really have time to do it justice today, so let's not try. But ultimately, all of these things were raised in my mind at that CC Expo last week. And it was more about what people weren't saying and weren't doing than it was about what they were saying and doing, for me.
And I'll tell you, I think you've hit the nail on the head.
At last, thanks for that. A compliment.
You get one.
Sorry.
You get one an episode.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I have my other 3? Because I didn't get any for the other 3 episodes.
You didn't have any in the other episodes apart from your long history lesson, which I will give you was good.
That's
the
true.
thing that I took away from CC Expo is that salespeople are not equipped to do their jobs in terms of selling AI and its benefits, if there are any, to customers. I don't think salespeople are equipped to listen to a customer problem right now, translate it into a solution, and be able to articulate the benefit. I don't think they're equipped right now. I think we are at a point where salespeople are woefully under-resourced with how to attack this.
And I have to say, that genuinely isn't a criticism of salespeople or individuals. It is just what happens when the hype overtakes the reality of what's going on the ground, and you need to catch up. Right? That's the real issue. So, Angus, let's give some takeaways here. The first one is that the vendors, sellers, are all saying the same thing, and I really feel for buyers that have got to work out which one to go for and really how they make those decisions. So the propositions are there, they're developing. Whilst everyone's saying the same thing, it also feels to me that the bigger vendors' propositions are developing faster than the small ones. And that's because of the raw horsepower and capability that they've got to develop this AI stuff that's probably lacking in the smaller businesses.
But is that a symptom of resource? And I think this is going to be very interesting going forward. Deploying this in the future is going to take big resource. You're going to need really deep wallets to play. And I think it's going to be increasingly difficult for smaller players to be able to do that. Or if you are a vendor with an old creaking platform that hasn't been redeveloped over the last 2-3 years, you might have a really tough time bolting on or doing all this new stuff.
Right, so takeaway number 1, everyone's saying the same thing. Takeaway number 2, the AI pitches, the AI messages that are coming from individual salespeople are very focused on the technical how rather than the business why, with lots of theory and very little proof.
Symptom of where we are on the curve.
But there's an enablement gap there with sales and pre-sales people that needs to be filled pretty quickly if we're going to move this thing forward. Takeaway number 3, when we tried to dig a little bit deeper, there was very little information about real cost. And if you can't have a conversation about real cost, you can't have a conversation about real cost benefit and ROI and all those other things that we're talking about. So that was something that really stood out for me.
Yeah.
Takeaway number 4, AI versus human contact center agents is still to be fully understood, let alone proven. And I think if we're not very careful as sellers and vendors, we could put our customers and buyers in a position where they're replacing one expensive resource, i.e. human beings, with another expensive resource, i.e. AI-powered solutions. We need to be very careful about understanding what the cost dynamics are before signing those bits of paper. That's a message for buyers more than it is vendors.
I think buyers, prepare yourself for bill shock.
Right, exactly. And prepare yourself for episode X, where we're going to discuss this in more detail. Final takeaway, given those huge energy requirements, we need to have a conversation about sustainability and the environment and how that works in provisioning of this stuff. So, Angus, are we done?
I think we're done. I think we'll be back next week with episode 5.
In the meantime, follow the Angus and Pete Show on LinkedIn for news, notifications and messages. Message us directly. Tell us what you think. Tell us what you want us to talk about. Tell us how we're going, and keep that post bag bulging.
Don't forget, the show's available on all your favorite podcast platforms. Like, subscribe, and share it to spread the word. And Pete's got a bloody big ego. It needs feeding. Now, but before we go,
it's outrageous.
Pete, you've got you've come up with this new innovation last episode about the joke of the week.
Yeah.
Have you actually thought about what your joke of the week? And
it's
got to be good.
I've got a joke.
It's got to be good.
I've got a joke of the week. Are you ready?
Yeah. Here we go.
Why did the AI chicken cross the road?
No, go.
To optimize the other side. Cheers, Angus.
They're getting worse. Cheers, Pete.
Thanks for tuning in to the Angus and Pete Show. Remember, it's based on the personal views and opinions of the hosts and their guests. If you're feeling aggrieved or litigious, take a chill pill. There's already enough stress in the world. Don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more episodes. We'll see you next time. Oh, and tell your friends.